There's 7 reservations and 12 tribes in Montana.
We're outdoor people. There's a lot of mountain activity, a lot of lake activity.
We love being rural, having a sense of family, sense of tradition, having outdoor opportunities.
My mother's mom is the granddaughter of Chief Dallknife. So yeah, we're like the 5th generation of Chief Dallknife, and I'm proud to be.
We are small communities and we're intertwined a lot through marriage or relationship or just having the social connections. And so anything that happens on any one of our reservations really affects all of us.
There's a lot of domestic violence on the reservation. When I was younger, I was scared watching my aunt get beat up. I got scared because of the way they were drinking and stuff. I mean, they'd get really violent.
Domestic violence is a very bad situation in any country. Probably about 90% of the time, either the victim is intoxicated or the suspect's intoxicated, or a lot of times both. And the normal argument will blow into a full-fledged domestic in terms of physical violence.
What you have is a cycle. It's a cycle of despair. One thing leads to another. And when you're in crisis, you run to alcohol and drugs to try to find the answer, and the answer's not there.
I didn't ever think it would ever happen to me, but yeah, it did.
Here in Montana, in Indian country, domestic violence takes really many of the same shapes and forms that you're going to see in any community anywhere. You have abuse that happens between, married couples, cohabiting couples, dating couples. We see that in our adolescent, teenage, high school population. We see that in our adults. We even see that in our elders.
Indian country in Montana, there's so much jurisdictional matrix. It's very unique and very challenging.
In Montana, we have 7 reservations. Some of those reservations, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal government has jurisdiction under the Major Crimes Act. Other reservations, the federal government does not have jurisdiction.
So I see a lot of women who are just really alone and very vulnerable, and they have no way to get out.
I just felt like I couldn't talk to anybody because he would find out. And that's why mostly I kept to myself. Well, I wanted to talk to the law enforcement, but I didn't want him to go to jail because then if he got out of jail, he would have attacked me for turning him in.
We have dealt with clients who were threatened by their offenders to not say anything. If they did, then their family members would be threatened.
A lot of times, the victim kind of retracts her statement, and so that makes it very, very difficult. And so we try to get audio recordings as best we can and have them write out statements as to what happened. But ultimately, it's up to the prosecutor as to whether they're going to prosecute or not. And so without the victim, it makes it very, very difficult.
I was with him for 3 years. He would say, "You're so lucky that I don't beat you like my other girlfriends." He told me that if I ever left him, that he was going to kill me.
We tend to think in law enforcement now, the deeper reason why they want to come back. Instead of the old days of saying, well, it's her fault, or his fault, so they're going to get beat up. They should have never went back there. That's the old way of thinking. Now the new way of thinking comes with education for law enforcement officers and training.
If the root problem of the domestic violence situation is not solved, the abusers and the victims find themselves right back at square one, and the cycle continues.
It's really, really important to understand in Indian country how this trauma is going unresolved, and it's creating the situations where people are ending up dying because of domestic violence.
The cases that result in death have a very complex history. And we want to instill an appreciation of the potential complexity of those cases.
Domestic violence is common because of poverty and household economics in Indian country. Abusers are frustrated. They don't have jobs. They abuse alcohol, drugs. It just creates this bad recipe for disaster.
So we might look for things like a prior history of domestic violence. Forced sex would be another one. Weapons use would be another one. Access to firearms. Multiple acts of strangulation or choking over a period of time are more potently predictive of an eventual homicide.
And if the intervention is not strong enough early on, this is a classic case where somebody's going to die.
So when we put these risk markers together, we begin to get a more complex sense of batterers and survivors and the interactions between them.
He likes to fight with guns. He even shot at me when I was on the bed and it missed me.
These types of cases are not often premeditated cases. However, when a dispute starts with alcohol, they escalate very quickly into something that nobody intended to happen.
But yet I still went back. I don't know why. I was drinking right along with him, but then I sobered up. I stayed sober for 14 months, and he was getting mad because I wouldn't drink with him. Prior to that morning is when I fell off. I drank with him.
I've yet to see any planning. If they're in the kitchen, they're going to grab a knife. If they're in the garage, they're going to grab a tool and bludgeon you. It's whatever weapons are available.
It's more oftentimes a male that is the perpetrator in these cases. However, that's not always the case.
I do know that we have had some fatalities on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation where the female has been the offender.
I've seen female victims, after years of abuse, they just had enough.
If you look back, there has been a history of domestic violence between the two couples, and it has resulted in the female trying to either protect herself or just frustrated, and the passion of the moment happens and a fatality will happen.
I guess he started beating on me when we were drinking, and I don't remember anything because I was so drunk. I guess I said I was standing up, pointing the gun at him, and I think the gun went out. I don't remember. And I just don't know what happened. I wish I wasn't drinking.
Most time these women that end up killing their spouses, I've been to that call before, and the females were the victims, and there were multiple times that they were the victims. And I wonder sometimes, what did I do wrong or what did I miss? And sometimes I feel guilty about that.
I took the plea bargain, and it was 16 months time served for involuntary manslaughter. I think about it every day. I stayed away from the res for 8 years. I straightened out my life. I got my kids back. I got my respect back from my family. I want to be there for them since I haven't been for the last 8 years. If I would have just got help early when he started hitting me, I could have got out of it.
It's really important and critical that the local criminal justice system intervenes and provides the services they need for both that victim and even for the defendant to understand that the violence is not okay. It's not okay at all.
And telling them the goal is to not incarcerate your partner, this person you love. The goal is to make sure that your family can function into the future and that there isn't a death that's going to result, whether that be your death or the abuser's death.
When we're addressing domestic violence in Native communities, we really need to have good partnerships amongst our team. We have to have good partnerships between law enforcement, our medical providers, our behavioral health, our victim services, and our child protection systems.
It's improving a lot on the reservation where there's more victim services, more people getting out there and connecting people with where they need to go for the help.
We need to continue that effort because it only takes one instance where a victim feels as if they weren't treated properly within the system, and then that word spreads, and then it lowers our effectiveness in ensuring that other victims come forward.
The more trust and cooperation that we can elicit by being present, the better those cases and those outcomes are going to be for people.
Our most effective tool is working together with other agencies out there to build a conveyor belt of resource services because rural Indian country is usually a long ways from direct services. We use the tribal programs and also any BIA services out there as well and building those partnerships.
We try to open doors for them so that they are not stuck in a hopeless situation.
Seeing justice in domestic violence cases, that's very rewarding.
In Indian country, domestic violence is common, but society has said it's not okay to engage in domestic violence.
It's really, really important to understand in Indian country how people are dying because of domestic violence.
We all have a vested interest in reviewing these tragedies. One of the principal purposes of conducting Fatality Review is not just to cast a light on the homicide cases or the cases that end tragically, but to provide us with a very detailed appreciation of the way domestic violence cases flow through systems in general. I'm director of the Family Violence Institute. The National Domestic Violence Fatality Review Initiative is part of the work of the Institute. We started, a group of us, back in the mid-90s with some grants to study domestic violence homicides, and we thought that we might benefit from setting up community-based review teams to develop preventive interventions. In good death review, our purpose is to look at the agencies and the stakeholders involved in these cases. Our goal is to recreate the view that the victim or the decedent, and indeed the perpetrator, had of the operation of those systems. In Native communities, I personally got started doing fatality review work by working with the Montana Fatality Review Team. We slowly became aware of the web of relationships between tribal, state, and local folks in the state of Montana. It seemed a state that was particularly amenable to creating an Indian country death review team.
No one in the state really kept any statistics on intimate partner homicides until the Montana team was developed. And what we started seeing in those statistics was that Native Americans make up about 7% of the population of Montana, and they were making up about 14% of intimate partner homicides.
It became clear that we needed to create a second team that was made up primarily of Native Americans and secondarily their federal partners, so the FBI, the BIA, the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And we thought, could we possibly apply for a grant and develop this new team? And we did. We were successful in getting that grant, and that was kind of the beginnings of it.
And it's the first team in the nation that is specifically focused on Native American domestic violence fatality.
They have the same powers and privileges that the statewide team does, and they started reviewing cases in 2014.
When we began this process, too, our Attorney General did go to the tribal council. He wrote letters to each of the chairmen explaining what we were doing.
Each of these 7 reservations in Montana is a sovereign nation with their own government, their own statutes, their own law enforcement, their own judiciary. There's a long history of tribes and state and federal governments not getting along very well, and the tribes feeling like they weren't treated as equals by the state and the federal government. So as this team was put together, it was absolutely essential that sovereignty be kept at the top of people's minds at all times. And in fact, even the decision to go forward with the Native American team had to be done by approaching each reservation and requesting their participation. All of the tribes in Montana agreed to participate, but that was not a given.
Some of the initial groundwork we did really spent a lot of time developing and trying to find those right people to be on the team.
And treat it like it's the first time.
In Indian country, it's important to have state players, federal players, and tribal players. And we find that by involving multiple eyes, multiple backgrounds, multiple sets of training, that helps to identify details or nuance in these cases that maybe any one discipline would never see on their own.
Everybody on our team has such a unique perspective from the fields that they come from or the work that they've done.
The multidisciplinary approach to the review team is fantastic. You have folks from courts, hospitals, social services, child protection.
So some members of the team are prescribed by statute. So there has to be law enforcement, there has to be a victim advocate, there has to be a judge, there has to be a legislator, with the additional goal of having a representative from all 7 reservations. And we have a person whose goal is to keep an eye on the cultural aspects and the cultural sensitivities of the team. So this individual opens each review in a traditional way and closes the review in the same way.
The team members that are on the Native American Fatality Review team are very strong people. They're awesome people. They're very dedicated to trying to find solutions that will prevent domestic violence in Indian country.
Each time I attend a review, I learn more and more about what we can do to help. Every time I go to a review, I pick up some tools from my tool bag.
Being part of the Native American Fatality Review team, we're able to sit together side by side with those partners and really hear their perspective and to really understand and learn what roles that they play when it comes to fatalities in Indian country.
The Domestic Violence Fatality Review team has allowed me to become a better investigator. There are more considerations on my mind than just the collection of evidence. When I approach a crime, I'm thinking more broadly about all of the factors, all of the individuals involved, in the hopes that future domestic violence fatalities can be prevented.
The principal outcome of fatality review work is an improvement in the communication, collaboration, coordination amongst the stakeholders that are involved in the handling of domestic violence cases.
Are you seeing any other differences?
It translates ideally into a better system for victims. I think it has the potential to translate into better advocacy services, better safety planning, better risk triaging on the part of law enforcement.
The 2015 report to the legislature was the first time that the work of the Native American team was combined with the state team. The recommendations so far have been to create opportunities for tribal and non-tribal professionals to get to know one another and to work together through training, and then also to help non-tribal members who interact with tribes understand cultural sensitivity, learn more about how tribal court works in order to make recommendations that make sense in Indian country.
We are making progress, really working together as a team to provide recommendations to the federal jurisdictions as well as state jurisdictions on how better they can work in Indian country. I'm hoping that our partnerships will become stronger as part of the team effort.
The folks on the team are amazing individuals, amazing professionals. They really have a heart and compassion for their communities, and not just their own communities, but for the state and for the nation.
So our agenda for the rest of the afternoon is to...
Montana right now is the only state in the country that has a Native American Fatality Review team, and we have a goal that other states with significant Native populations can learn from the way Montana does its work and perhaps implement those same teams in their states.
Really what the ultimate goal is here is to try to find answers and try to prevent domestic violence in Indian country, and that is our goal.
Our hope is that we change history.
When we went to the mortuary to get Raylan ready for our wake, she had a bullet hole right there. And powder burns. So I said, I don't want to hide any of this. I want people to see this. I want people to see this bullet hole right here in my daughter. Maybe somehow it'll save one person to see how you can end up.
Our reservation is home to the Mission Mountain Tribal Wilderness, so we have a lot of very beautiful country here. Within the last few years, we had one case that resulted in a fatality. As a Native American Fatality Review member, I've gone to other reservations and reviewed their fatalities, but when it hits home, it affects you personally, as opposed to going to another reservation and you're reviewing a fatality of someone you don't know.
I don't know what he was doing with a gun that morning. He tried to stage it as a suicide. He tried to say that Ray shot at him and shot around the house. But as soon as the cops got there, they knew that wasn't true.
The Native American Fatality Review team meets twice a year, once in May and once in October. And so in the time between those reviews, the coordinator is busy gathering information that will be helpful to the review process. Criminal histories, criminal justice records, pre-sentence investigations, court records, autopsy reports, mental health records.
They go clear back to the beginning when these two folks were born, and even beyond that. They like to, if we can, get any information on parents, grandparents, to see if there was a history of violence there.
The coordinator collects that information and then passes it on to the team members. So by the time the team members come together for that review, everyone in the room has read the same information.
So the idea is to create a wide-angle lens to reconstitute the case through the eyes of the people that lived it. It's not our aim to specifically point to a system failure that directly caused a death. What we are keen to do is to build a philosophical approach that doesn't blame and shame systems, but that seeks to understand why tragic outcomes occur and attempt to plug those gaps or improve the way systems are sensitive to the plight of victims and indeed sometimes perpetrators.
Simultaneous to that information being gathered, key individuals are being interviewed by team members. So parents, siblings, adult children, coworkers, anyone that the team believes might be able to shed some light on this case.
I didn't want her to be with him because he had a history of abuse with his women folk, and didn't want that to happen to my daughter. She told me that time and time again, that she could handle him, and she made me believe her because she was a strong little girl. She was a smart little girl.
One of the main things that we adopted from the Montana team is taking our entire team to the community where the event happened and really focusing on one case at a time. We have a facilitator to keep the train running on the tracks. We have a definite start time, we have a definite end time, and we have someone there that can keep us focused. So when we start our reviews, we start usually on a Thursday afternoon. We always invite an elder that comes in and tells the history of that community.
And I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to come into our homeland and sharing all the information that we need to move forward on these types of issues. But so I'm gonna pray.
We also always start with a prayer, and the different communities have different customs.
Stronger men and women. Amen. So
then we go right into the review where the team builds a timeline, and we have these sheets of paper representing different incidents or facts. Everything we have heard about this couple, we put on the wall.
At the time of her death, she was working 2 jobs. She would go out and work at Kicking Horse Job Corps.
And we build this picture across the span until the death occurs.
The victim or decedent's voice in the review is the most important part of the review. And obviously we try to recreate that voice in a variety of ways.
The victim isn't just a victim of an intimate partner homicide. She's also a daughter, a mother, a sister. We find that very often family and friends and coworkers, the victim has confided in those people much more than in a victim advocate or someone who works in a shelter or a police officer.
All of us divide up somebody to talk to that was close to the victim, close to the subject, that knows a lot about their childhood and just as much about them as we can find.
Raylan's adopted dad, Neil, died of a heart attack. Raylan was 8 at the time. She was home with him when it occurred, and it affected her for a long time.
By working equally hard at getting information from the perpetrator's family, friends, and coworkers, we get a more well-rounded sense of that person as well.
We always recommend the original defendant's voice be accessed. We always advise communities that if you're going to do that as a review team, you need to know the file and you know it inside out. We want to know how perpetrators saw systems. And it's surprising sometimes what they will tell us once the dust has settled.
At one point, his dad picked up a piece of wood and hit him in the head so hard that he passed out and couldn't feel his body and has no memories after getting hit there.
We think it's essential for the way that we do fatality review in Montana that we understand as much as we can about both the victim and the perpetrator in order to come up with these recommendations to try to reduce the rate of intimate partner homicide.
Also in that month, Raylan's last visit to her mom took place. She showed up in the evening and was upset and said she was leaving Adrian because of the drinking and arguing being more and more and more frequent.
She just believed that she could show him a better life. Oftentimes she would tell me what kind of life he grew up in, that his father was very abusive, and so she was trying to make up for a lot of that. In August of 2014, she came home again, and she said she was not going back. And then one evening, he was calling her, he was drunk, and at one point he said, "I'm going to come and kill your mother and rape her." And that scared me.
Adrian said about himself, he was in and out of group homes and in juvenile lockup, and it was then that he got into alcohol.
The next morning, the local law enforcement officer, the local judge, those people are invited into the room to critique that timeline because these individuals, both the victim and the perpetrator, have resided in this community, sometimes for a few months and sometimes their entire lives. These people in the room know them, and they know things that would never appear in a written report, and they can add details and nuance to the information that we have.
Next day, there is a Lake County case report number incident where he allegedly put a knife to the throat of his girlfriend.
And then Friday afternoon, before the team disbands, recommendations are agreed to. What have we learned about this case? What do we think might be done differently? How could the tribe or the state or the county or the detention facility or the judiciary do things different that might prevent something like this from happening again?
So your recommendation would be review the child protection statutes with the idea of looking at how we can better address DV and the intersection of child abuse.
I think we'd even be getting started somewhere to get a dispatch training for dispatchers that DV could be even a piece of. I mean, we'd be getting big places.
If the cops are called, and they notice that there is a DV situation, even if you tell him, you can't come to the house for 24 hours, that way if they are ready to go, they can start packing up and they can get out.
It's really hard. Even today, she was 29.
All of us as individuals have grown our understanding of really how deep domestic violence affects tribal communities.
We have committed, intelligent, passionate people around the table who are all interested in reducing the number of deaths related to domestic violence in Montana.
I just hope somehow this will touch somebody's heart to know if they're living with somebody in an abusive relationship. that this could happen to you.
We have yet to wipe out intimate partner homicide, but we believe we've helped reduce the number of intimate partner homicides in the country.